Welcome to the Scale Up Valley podcast, where we bring the best founders, CEOs, and investors to help you scale a business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is a very special one. His name is Joel Trammell, the American CEO. Joel, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Yeah, and people are just listening. So we have a great guest today, the American CEO. Let us know more about your amazing story and why today you use this signature, the American CEO.
Sure, Mike. So I started my career in the U.S. Navy, teaching at what they call Naval Nuclear Power School, and thought I was going to get a PhD in engineering, and that's why I wanted to try teaching, but decided that business and starting a business was much more interesting. I really became fascinated with the role of CEO or commanding officer. How do you run an organization at scale? And of course, at 25, no one was going to hire me to run their business, so I had to start my own.
Right.
And so that's what kind of launched my career, was starting my own business. And then you pretty quickly become unqualified to do anything else, so you better figure out a way to make it work.
Exactly. I love it. I can recognize myself, not the same track record yet, but we'll get there. But definitely, yes. So then we are not suitable for any other context.
And then the American CEO comes from a letter that Peter Drucker, the famous business mentor and strategist, wrote to the Wall Street Journal many years ago, where he described a kind of unique role that in the U.S. the CEO takes on. In Europe, often the CEO role's paired with a chairman and works kind of in concert with that chairman, but no surprise that the American role of CEO is more of a lone wolf role. And he described that, and he titled that letter "The American CEO." So I started using that moniker.
Sounds amazing. And let's start from the beginning. So you founded your first companies in 1990 from 1990 to 1960, right? From 1990.
First company, 1999, 2000 timeframe.
Okay.
1990 timeframe, not 2000. 1990 timeframe. I was getting out of the military. Was trying to figure out what to do, and I looked at going to business school, kind of the classic track. You go get the MBA and learn how to run a business. But at that time, school I was looking at in Orlando, Florida, where I was, wanted you to take 60 hours of undergraduate business before they would let you into their business school. And as an arrogant engineer, I didn't think that made any sense. And so I decided to just start my own business and figured I would learn that way what business was all about.
So, and you were able to exit those two first companies, right? UST Computers and HomeSmart. And then you decide to evolve to kind of have your first VC-backed company. So kind of hypergrowth, raising capital. So you kind of started with both two businesses in terms of a bootstrapping mode, I assume, right? So
right.
Kind of more the lifestyle business and being able also to train your muscle as a CEO, identify opportunities, have that kind of freedom that all of us are looking for, and being able to design your own destiny. And then you get to a moment that you want to go to the next layer to challenge yourself again, right? And what about trying to do something big in a short period of time, something more scalable? And that's when you evolve to help me with the name of the company. I think it's
NetQoS.
Yes. Yeah, I was correct. I should trust more on my skills.
Well, QoS is a networking acronym for quality of service. So right. It was kind of a catchy name if you were in that world. But the evolution. I mean, I think everyone that's interested in having a business should start one and run it with their own money first. I mean, a lot of people go out and try to raise money.
Right. That's the opposite today.
And they don't really know much about what they're doing. And you can learn so much, even if it's just running a lemonade stand. When it's your own money and you have to make decisions about how to spend it, you take those decisions much more seriously. And when you have to figure out how to put food on the table consistently, you learn a lot. And so I felt like those first two businesses I started, where they were coming out of my own pocket, and where I was able to learn a lot of basic skills across many different areas. Because when you start a business like that and you don't have funds, you're doing every job. You're doing sales, you're doing marketing, you're keeping the books. And I thought having a little bit of experience in each of those areas has proved hugely valuable in my career. But then, we watched. I would pick up the Austin business paper every Monday. They would have a business section. You'd see about some new business and that was getting funded at some crazy valuation. And I had previously maybe been a little scared to take money from a VC type organization, wondering if I would have control. But for the right price, I can be bought. And so as valuations continued to increase, we were fortunate. We started pitching late in 1999 and closed our initial round of funding in March of 2000, which was right as the internet bubble was bursting. And if we had waited a few more months, we probably wouldn't have closed the funding. But we were able to raise $11 million. That was basically a business plan. It was my wife's intellectual property that she had developed. She's a PhD in electrical engineering. And we had one customer at the time. And we were able to raise $11 million at that point, which was a lot of money in those days. And
your wife was a co-founder of the business or a partner?
Absolutely. Yeah. She was and it was really her intellectual property. Yeah. And that is certainly different, running a business with your wife, though in our case, it was, I would say, relatively simple. I mean, she was clearly the technologist. She was clearly the expert in her field. And she really didn't have much interest, like many technologists, in kind of the rest of the business. And so it was kind of, she ran the technology and everything else was my problem.
Amazing. So kind of the CEO, CTO, the ideal founding team for a VC-backed company or any tech company, right? So someone who knows the business and someone who knows the technology and the industry, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we started with the 90s on your 20s. Now we went to the 2000s and you start the company. You raised the first round in
2000.
In 2000, correct. Thank you for helping me out. And then you exit the company in 2009 for $200 million, returning 10x to your investors to CA Technologies, which is, amazing. In terms of the size of the business, are you able to share any kind of, just people understand, in terms of headcount or in terms of more or less?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we built the business from, basically zero in revenue when we were first funded to about $60 million in revenue.
Wow.
We had, 31 consecutive quarters of double-digit year-over-year growth, which
amazing,
which was a great run. We did have to deal with, soon after we got funded, of course, in 2001, 9/11 happened, and there were issues obviously around that. So in anything, and then it was kind of bookended by 2008 when Lehman failed and we had the financial crisis. That caused another set of issues, but the business performed exceptionally well. And, you look back and you go, if you had a business with those same numbers a year or two ago, they'd have been telling you that business was worth $2 billion or something. So, timing matters, but 200 million was an excellent exit. And as you mentioned, it provided a 10x return to our investors. So everyone was happy with that deal.
Yeah, we were just imagining a 10x. It would be at least 600 million, right? So, and we know the multiples that we have been seeing. As you said, 1.5 years ago. Now things are a bit more calmer, but still higher multiple than what you got at the moment. But let's also have in mind that you were kind of you were a lot early and a lot ahead in terms of the movement than we saw evolving in terms of more VC forums, more founders wanting to start their own companies and raise capital and go through the VC route. I think that nowadays we see kind of almost the opposite movement, which is they go through VC and then they get to a moment that they would love to create a profitable machine. They don't want to be dependent on aggressive growth when there is no market. So we start seeing kind of the contrarians saying, we don't want VC. We want to go through kind of more lifestyle, have our own independence, have more freedom, which is good to see, because at the time there was not the option. So it was much more, we need to build our own businesses in a bootstrapping mode. And if we really have an outlier idea, an outlier team, and we have the right timing and the capacity to raise those funds, then we go through the VC route. But very few people would know about it, right? So maybe more in the Valley and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, these things go through cycles. I mean, entrepreneurs often make the mistake of assuming that the current conditions are going to be the conditions forever, and they're not. And be prepared. And, you know, I was telling people a few years ago, you're not always going to be able to raise money at a huge valuation. Be prepared. And some weren't. And obviously we've seen the fallout of that over the last, year.
Absolutely. So, and then you go to your second company, your second VC-backed company, not your second, it would be your fourth. So 2 on a bootstrapped mode,
Sure.
2 on a VC-backed mode, which is Cash IQ.
Yeah, that's correct. And that was kind of a hybrid model, I would say, because that business came about. I initially funded that business out of my pocket with the proceeds from the NetQoS sale to buy some assets of a failed startup. At the time, there was a startup that had been in about $20 million had been invested. It had gone bankrupt, and Silicon Valley owned the assets. And so we initially bought the assets, and then we syndicated the deal out kind of to family and friends rather than institutional VC type money.
Well, interesting movement. And then you are there since 2012, just 18 months, and you are able to sold it to NetApp, and again have a return of 7x to your investors. So what you'd like to highlight there in terms of the lessons learned, and what was the challenge for you as well, right? So you just were successful starting, scaling, and exiting a VC-backed company. So you have gone through all the cycle, which is very rare, let's say. Sometimes we think that as we saw this in the magazines and podcasts, that we think that it's easy, but the majority of us, unfortunately, will not have that story to tell.
Right. So yeah. So the second one, goes under the mantra of it's better to be lucky than good. We were smart enough to acquire the asset, which was some intellectual property around building a high-speed storage appliance. We re-engineered the product. We got the product ready to release, and we were just starting to generate revenue. And I think things were going pretty well at the time, but it was unclear whether the product was going to find product market fit, how big the market was. All those questions were still very unanswered. And NetApp came along and needed the technology for a purpose that we had never imagined the technology would be used for. And so it happened that we were standing in the right place at the right time with just the right technology. And we were able to take advantage of that and return, as you mentioned, 7x to investors over a very short period of time.
Wow. So, and nowadays there is also a kind of a new famous trend also for people who are in VC or are MBA students, which is instead of starting your own company or go work for a large company, why don't you buy a business and then scale that business instead of go from the 0 to 1 that we know it's the odds of success are very low, and it takes a lot of time until we find product market fit. So why not find a business that is already product market fit? Maybe the owners have a succession problem, or they don't know, or they don't want even to scale it from 1 to 10 or 10 to 50 and go buy that business. Was more with that mindset that you were when you look at to Catch IQ, or were you trying to find something? In this case, it was different because it was a failed startup, as you said, but were you trying to kind of pick an asset instead of building something from scratch again and trying to to be faster in terms of making it work?
Yeah, the way I thought of it, and the way I think of technology businesses in general is, first of all, is it a big problem? Or you're solving a big problem? But then, do you have some unique ability and expertise to solve that problem? And typically on these difficult technical problems, there aren't a lot of people around the world that can solve the problem. I mean, in the NetQoS case, the network performance example, my wife was, arguably the world's expert in network performance based on work she had done previously in her career. And when you are the expert at something like that, and maybe you're not the only one, maybe there are 2 or 3 other groups in the world, but there aren't many people who can solve that particular problem. And so what I saw in Cash IQ was a problem that I thought was a significant problem, and they had figured out how to solve it. Now, they had not executed on solving the problem, but they had the team together that knew how to solve the problem, that I believed was capable of solving the problem. And so I think that makes some sense. And sometimes when you're looking at challenges in technology companies, do they have that real competitive advantage of knowing how to solve a very difficult problem that only a few groups in the world probably have the capability and resources to solve?
Yeah. I assume at this stage in 2009, so before 2012, when you bought this company, you were already in a moment that you were almost financially free. So you had the option, the luxury of thinking about the next years, which sometimes it's also tough for some founders who exit their businesses, right? So what's next? Of course, you already saw it in 2 businesses before, but maybe at that time you didn't have the freedom to say, okay, now I will do just whatever I want, and I don't need to work anymore to make money. So I'm able still to make money, but just to do what I love, right? So and to have an impact and to find a higher purpose for what I do. So and that's why in 2013, I assume that you got passionate about having a larger impact and creating kind of the core software and kind of building a new category, the CEO stack. I'm just introducing that topic because the majority of our listeners should be listening. So are you not asking any questions to Joel about some of his lessons learned, starting, scaling, and exiting a company? Because that's the main topic of this podcast. Yes, I'm just waiting because Joel is also a book author, and he has been kind of summarizing all the lessons learned as CEO and helping other CEOs. That's your big passion today, right? And
Sure.
we will get there in a minute, right? So, and let us know more about this new chapter on your life. So bootstrapping companies, starting and scaling VC-backed companies, this experience in 18 months about buying a failed startup and turning it into a great return. And now it's much more kind of, how do I create a movement? How do I have a larger impact? How do I do something that I love? And that is not only attached to the money game, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I hoped, obviously, when I started businesses that we were going to make money doing them.
Yeah,
but I was
absolutely.
really fascinated by how you run a business. That was really the driving factor. And if I'd have had to, after 10 years of running businesses, had to go back and get a job, I would not have felt like that was wasted time, because that was just really the passion, was learning how to run the business. Now, the fact that I did become, wealthy from doing it was great, and did, as you mentioned, give me the opportunity to think about things differently. And really what I began to observe was many businesses that failed, that I thought failed for the wrong reason. I mean, there are a lot of reasons businesses fail. Sometimes you just don't have the right product, your timing's not right, whatever. But if you get all those details right, a lot of these businesses I saw fail or not be as successful as I thought they could be were to poor management and leadership. And I thought that there was no reason that should happen, and that maybe I could contribute to educating CEOs on how to better run their businesses. So if they got in the right position where everything was going well, that they maximized their return. I mean, I've often seen businesses that I thought should have turned into home runs turn into singles or strikeouts because of just poor management and leadership. Nothing technically wrong with the product or what they were doing, but they just didn't understand how to scale a business. And so, that's why I was excited to come on your podcast, because this is the topic that you spend a lot of time, I know, talking about.
Absolutely. And again, you already explained that you create also the why you have this signature, the American CEO. So in 2014, you also create the American CEO brand to build educational resources for chief executives. And then 2019, 2020, and even this year, you keep creating new brands to this ecosystem to support CEOs to be successful and also their teams. So the Texas CEO magazine, the Manager 360 for much more for the teams of the leaders, so the managers, right, as the name says, and then the CEO S, or kind of more related with your book, I imagine, the Chief Executive Operating System.
Yeah, so I'm always looking for ways to reach CEOs, to reach them where they are, and try to educate them on the things that I think I've learned along the journey. And I've spent a lot of time teaching, and that is, in an endeavor where you really learn the most when you try to teach a subject. So I started teaching a CEO course now 15 years ago. And so when you've taught it for that long and you've seen that many different situations, you learn a lot about the job. And so, I tongue in cheek tell people I got the best system in the world for being CEO, because it's the only one I know of that somebody's out there, day to day teaching how to be CEO, particularly at scale. This is not, just focused on the startup world, but really on the scaling piece of the equation. And that's an area where there's just not a lot of literature out there on exactly how to do the job from people who've been in the chair and done it.
Yeah. And so let's go to that toolkit. But before, you still wanted to have a new challenge because you were maybe getting bored just working on this trend and helping others. You wanted to go to the driver's seat again. So you said, oh, maybe what about leading a public company, right? So Black Box from 2017 to 2019. So
yeah, well, that was one that I kind of stumbled into. I'd been on the board of the company. One of my previous investors was chairman of the board of a small public company, and so he had asked me, now that I had free time, would I be willing to serve on the board of the company? And I saw it as a favor to him to help out serve on the board. And the challenge serving on a board is very different than being in the CEO chair, and you can't have the same influence you do. And a public company, board is also much more structured than a private company board. And so that was fine. But then the company ran into some issues. The board decided to replace the CEO. And I remember sitting at the meeting where we decided this, and looking around the table and realizing that I was the only one at the table that wasn't collecting Social Security at the time. And so I was likely to be the next CEO, because when you have a small public company and it's struggling and you decide to fire the CEO, there aren't a lot of choices. And right. So yeah, I had to jump back into the chair and spend about 15 months getting that company in a position to be sold. And it was really a stressful time. It was a firefighting drill. It was not the ideal CEO position where you come in and set a vision and can grow the company. And it was really all about a bunch of fires that the company had and trying to put out the fires and keep the wheels turning. And we managed to do that at least well enough to get the shareholders some money out of the deal.
Amazing. So let's try to kind of summarize all the lessons learned during these stages. So again, bootstrapping businesses, scaling and exiting VC-backed businesses, even buying technology and then finding an exit to that technology, then leading also public company, but also already, again, founding new products, new companies to support CEOs to be successful, to create this CEO stack. So what is the book Chief Executive Operating System about, and what are the main areas that you were able to, let's say, structure in order to support CEOs, even in your CEO course that you were talking about?
Sure. So yeah, I'd written a book called CEO Tightrope, and when I wrote that book, it was related certainly to the training I had been doing, but I wasn't. I didn't want to be arrogant and say, this is how you do the job, and there's only one way to do the job, and be super specific about it. Because first of all, I didn't know that answer. And I assumed that there would be people come out of the woodwork that would tell me how I was wrong about my approach, or here's a different approach, or you didn't know this or didn't know that. And instead, what I found through training hundreds of CEOs were most of them were craving somebody to tell them exactly what to do. Now, they may want to customize it for their particular business, but there was just a dearth of information about specifically what the CEO does. Yeah, you can read all these highfalutin books about leadership as a trait, and all the kind of sound good, feel good kind of stuff. But what does the CEO really do on a day-to-day basis? What are their responsibilities when they get up in the morning? What do they need to make sure has happened in the organization? And so this led me to develop Chief Executive Operating System, which is really a playbook for if I was going to run your business, what would I do, and kind of in what order would I do it? How would I approach these various things? Even to the point of here are some templates and structures and stuff that you might find helpful in that journey.
And can you tell more about, so what are those structures about? So what is kind of the structure of the book, et cetera, et cetera? So
sure.
People get
so I've divided the CEO role into 5 fundamental responsibilities. No shock to the people that it starts with owning the vision, where the company's going, what's our purpose, what's our mission, vision. We talk, about how you put that in words that inspire people. What are our values? This is a concept that a lot of people talk about but don't execute very well, because most of the time when they talk about values, they really mean virtues, things that we universally agree are good. So they'll write things like honesty down as a value. That tells your employees absolutely nothing. Everybody knows you want employees to be honest. Values from a business perspective must be differentiable. And so, a famous example is Southwest Airlines decided when they started that they were going to be fun as a brand. Mm-hmm. No airline was talking about being fun in 1970, whatever, when Southwest Airlines got started. And so that differentiated them from everyone else. And you can see that still flows through the organization today. And so we talk about that, and then we talk about using strategy. But to me, the output of strategy has to be a set of strategic objectives, which are clearly definable goals out 2 or 3 years in the future. There's a lot of strategy work you may need to do behind the scenes to get to that. But if you don't have some clear milestones you can communicate to the organization out in the future, all that strategy work to me is kind of wasted, because if the organization doesn't know where you're going, it's going to be really hard to get there. And so we put that all together into a 1-page document. And then we, in my businesses, I print it out on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, laminate it, and stick it on everybody's desk so that they absolutely know what the plan is from a high level for the organization. And it's shocking to me. I used to walk into businesses all the time, and one of my favorite questions to just kind of the random employee sitting in a cube was, what's the plan here in this business? And every time they would look at me like I was crazy and go, don't you understand, sir? I just, I do AP, or I'm a sales guy or whatever. They had no clue where the business was going. And then the CEO shocked that people aren't making the right decisions to move towards their vision when that vision has not been communicated in any meaningful way to the company.
Fully agreed. And I like to do an exercise, which is kind of the vision reverse engineering, where I start with long term and come to the mid-term and then the short term. Sure. So typically, I try to not stay too much in the long term, kind of the 10-year vision, but we still need to have that North Star, that dream in the future, right? So then come to the 3-year vision and be able also to write down, so what is success in 10 years, 3 years, and next year. So I think it's even much easier then to be able to define what are the objectives, what are the milestones that we want to achieve next year, when we have it clear, that kind of North Star in the future and the 3-year plan in place. Because nowadays, as we know, the 5-year plans might be a bit too
long out there. Yeah, hard to predict.
And also I like the 3, because in the 5 you were kind of you know, I still have 5 years to get there. When it's free,
Yep.
it's, oh, we are already going through the first year, and the first year is ending. So 4 quarters, and it's only 12 quarters for 36 months, right? So 12
Right.
quarters, that's not a lot. You just said that you broke the records over 30 plus quarters. So
Yep.
which shows how many years we were talking about, which is pretty incredible. Anyway, really enjoyed. Anything that you would like to highlight, or maybe let me come back to a question that I like, is some people are maybe thinking, is this applicable for any size of company? So is this applicable for CEOs who are leading a company from 50 to 250 people, 250 to 500 people, or 500 to 1,000? I will exclude startups here because we talk much more about scaling up here.
Yeah, so that's one of the interesting things that I've not seen many people talk about, is the nature of the CEO role and how it changes based on basically number of employees is probably the best metric to use. And it's not in the obvious way. People, would think that running a company of 200 and running a company of 2,000 are dramatically different. My experience is there are three basic stages. There's the 1 employee to 25 or so employees startup phase, which most people can run out of their head. They know what everybody's doing. They're serving as CEO and all the key executive roles, or maybe they've got a partner who's CTO, but they're doing most of the executive roles. And then you transition from about 25 or 30, that starts getting impossible for one person to be the executive in charge of everything. And so then there's a transition that occurs to about 100 or 150 employees, somewhere in there, where you find executives who can run each of the functional areas of the business. And you, if you're doing it right, hand off those responsibilities. But once you get to 150 employees and you've got a full executive team, that didn't dramatically feel different running. I remember when we sold NetQoS, we were around 270 employees, and that didn't feel dramatically different to me running NetQoS or running the public company that had 3,000 employees. And the reason for that is because from the CEO's perspective, it was basically the same group of people. I had a 8 or 10 person executive team. I had a board that was responsible for, maybe a few individual contributors. Sure, we were a public company, and so I had to get online and read a statement every quarter. But the day-to-day job of the CEO didn't change that much from 250 to 3,000. What did change dramatically is the job of the CEO from 20 employees to 100 employees. And that's where we see most founders fail, because they fail to make the transition, and they try to run 100 employees by working 5 times as hard as they worked when they were running 20 employees. Right. And that doesn't work.
Right. Yeah, and I was kind of putting myself in the shoes of the CEO here, especially the ones who are listening to us, and kind of saying, what is one of the struggles? Especially, let's assume we already got to 100 people, right? So, and typically the systems are breaking. If you don't have the right people on the right seats in the leadership team, things will get a nightmare for the CEO. And typically, if you are growing very quickly, it is always difficult to balance. Sometimes you don't have yet the profitability, or you didn't raise capital enough to be able to hire great people in all seats. So you need to select those seats. But sometimes I say, oh, I don't have a CFO to sit at this stage, and I will not invest in the CFO or in a world-class CFO yet. But what typically I like to say is, you need to have a finance representation in that call. Maybe right. It's a junior person. It's not the ideal version 2.0 or 3.0, 4.0, as I want to call it. Maybe you will invest more now in the CRO or in the CMO or in the COO, whatever it is. But what's your position on kind of structuring the leadership team, having in mind that sometimes you have a constraint, you can't invest in sure. world-class people in all positions, right?
Yeah, I think this really goes back to a even more fundamental point. What is your mental model for your business? And this is something I've used a lot in training that really opens people's eyes, because most people's business model for business is, I build a product or have a service or whatever, and I sell that product, and more is better. Selling more is better. And I do that while trying to not run out of money. And that is kind of their operating model for a business and in their head. And that works at the startup phase. That is the startup job, is to define a product, sell it, and don't run out of money. But once you get to these scale up phases we're talking about, I think businesses get much more complicated, and you've got to have a more complicated business model. And this is where a lot of CEOs fail, because if you don't have the experience, you don't see that bigger model. If you come out of sales, you think everything's sales and there's nothing else to the business. And so I talk about you see on the cover of the book, the 2 triangles of tension. There are really 6 kind of fundamental areas of the business that the CEO has to focus on. There's, first of all, a triangle of tension between employees, customers, and shareholders that you're constantly balancing. And the only way to build a long-term, sustainable, thriving business is to provide value to each of those groups consistently. You have to constantly provide value to the employees. You have to constantly provide value to customers. You have to constantly provide value to shareholders. And those are fundamental positions to me in any organization chart. The CFO typically represents shareholders, a chief customer officer to represent customers, and a CHRO to represent the employees. And then internal to the business, there's another triangle of tension between sales, marketing, and product. And, CEOs come to me all the time and ask me, how do I get my sales and marketing people to get along? And I say, that's kind of like cats and dogs. They don't get along, but you can teach them to coexist. But that's really your job, is managing that tension between sales, marketing, and product. And so, fundamentally, from an organizational perspective, you need somebody who's representing sales at the table, somebody who's representing marketing at the table, and somebody who's representing the product or the service at the table. And so I have CEOs all the time draw out those 6 fundamental areas and then put the right name in the box. And sometimes you're not going to have the resources such that you have a unique name in every one of those boxes, but you need to then understand that if you don't have a name in that box, you're it. And there are times you need to do that particular role. Like you mentioned, the CFO. If you don't have a CFO, that's fine, but then you need to understand you need to be the CFO for that organization. And that is a different set of requirements than the CEO job. And so often when I draw that out for people begin to understand why they're having problems in their organization is because they don't have this underlying mental model and functional model of how a business works, and somebody's not represented at the table.
Yeah. And sometimes what I see also, especially in the ones who are trying to, stay profitable as they scale, and we know that growth sucks cash, and it's really difficult to have profitable growth, is, being a little bit afraid of consuming some of the profitability with hiring those high-level leadership team members that maybe will have a return very quickly, but typically it takes 12 months to have a real return, and then get to a size where, the company starts scaling to a stage where the cost starts becoming much less, and then they get again to the same level of profitability that they were before. But doing that compromise in terms of the profitability and in terms also of the impact in the cash flow, it's typically a difficult decision to do, and typically I see the CEO kind of being between the chicken and the egg kind of question, which means if I don't hire this role, I will not be able to get to the certain scale, but in the short term, this will affect our profitability and our cash flow level. So any ideas about how to unblock this kind of fear that comes from the one at the top?
Absolutely. And so the key here, and this is a key part of the operating system, is building a business that is predictable, and training every employee in the organization to look at things from a prediction perspective. Most organizations run from a data perspective. They think we collect all this data and then we analyze that data and that tells us what to do. The problem with that is data by definition is historical. It's already happened. Can't be data until it's already happened.
Right.
And so you're always looking backwards. What you have to do is you have to train your employees to constantly predict what is likely to happen in the future. And so the consequence of that, if you get good at that, is your ability to run the business at the edge. The mantra I gave while we were having these, 31 quarters of double-digit growth is I want to grow as fast as we can without running out of money, but I need predictability to do that. And we had great predictability in our business because we built that in, and that allowed us to have visibility into cash flow out typically 6 months in advance. Most businesses I go in don't know how much cash they're going to have in the bank next week. And if you don't know how much cash you're going to have in the bank next week, yeah, it's really hard to decide whether I hire that, executive. But if I know how much cash I'm going to have in the bank 6 months from now, I've got some flexibility because I have time to adjust if things start turning down a little bit or whatever. And so that's one of the reasons it's so important to have an operating system in your business, is so you're not running blind. I mean, most businesses to me are run like a bus driver driving the bus by looking in the rearview mirror. And then they're shocked when they run into things. Well, they have no visibility in front of them into their operation of their business. And so, a 6-month cash flow is one of the things that I work with every CEO. If you don't have that in your business today, a reasonably accurate 6-month cash flow, and you don't know where that is kind of in your head, you've got a problem. That's just like driving a bus with the front windshield all fogged up.
I love it. So we kind of covered a bit the importance of having a clear vision so that everyone in the organization knows what is the plan, kind of the question that you like to ask when you walk around
Right.
the company. Then we kind of discussed it much more, that independently of the size of the business, you are still leading your leadership team. So what changes is the version of that leadership team, as I like to call it. It's the version 2.0, 3.0, or even
Sure.
if you want to, the version 5 million, the version 10 million, the version 25 million. It's even better because then you know what is the version that you are talking about. Then we kind of discussed also the importance of not only looking to your revenue, but also to your profitability and your cash flow, the cash flow map for the next 6 months. And I wanted to introduce the next one, and then I forgot when I was doing the summary. Now I know, which is typically what I like to say in my own framework, which is clarity of vision, then world-class team, and then the execution machine. So which is all about the cadence and the importance of communication. So we know what is the plan, but we need to be in the know about what is going and what are the blockers. How do we unblock the blockers, let's say in that way. Do you have any kind of meeting cadence that you like to see, kind of a weekly, a quarterly, an annual, one-on-one,
Sure.
a town hall?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about that extensively in the operating system. Typically a weekly team meeting's great, but what's in that team meeting is what's really critical. And to get this predictive kind of performance, you've got to not only have everything structured correctly by setting clear goals. I'm a big believer in goals on a quarterly basis that are clearly set, but then you got to ask the right question. Most organizations ask the question of every employee, where are you on that goal? That's the wrong question to ask. I don't care where you are on the goal. I care how likely you are to achieve the goal. And so, the perfect example of that, you've got a salesperson, they're 80% of their way towards their quota, but they've got no pipeline left. They know they're not going to hit their number. All they can do with telling me they're 80% to quota is confuse me, because I'm going to look at my watch and go, oh, wait a minute, you're 80% to quota. You're going to get done this quarter. They know they're not going to get there. Right. On the reverse, they could be at 20% and I could be looking at that and be all concerned, but they know they've got plenty of deals and they're going to knock it out of the park this quarter. And so most organizations don't ask the right question. First of all, they don't set clear goals and objectives and then ask the right question. So if you walked into my weekly meeting running a public company, $1 billion revenue, or near $1 billion revenue public company, that meeting took 30 minutes.
Wow.
We didn't look at a bunch of charts. We didn't look at a bunch of data. We looked at the 5 or 6 objectives that we had told the board we were trying to achieve this quarter. And I turned to the group and basically said, hey, we said we're going to generate $250 million in revenue this quarter. Anybody got any reason to believe we're not going to get there?
Wow.
If we do, let me know. If not, then I'm going to go assume everything's okay. And, let's go to the next goal. And that is the only way at scale that you can run an organization. If you say, show me all the deals we're working, when you're doing 250, I mean, it has no value. I can't provide any value as the CEO doing that. If I can look at the sales data and figure out something in that 5 minutes that my executive in charge of sales, who spends 50 hours, 60 hours a week in the data, doesn't know, all I know is I've got an idiot running sales. Okay.
Yep. That's
it. But a lot of CEOs think, it makes them comfortable. Show me the data. Show me what we're doing. How's that deal going? How's that? You're totally sidetracked, and you're actually being the VP of sales when you're asking all those questions. You're not being the CEO.
Yeah. And yeah, you are teaching the VP sales there, which is a huge red flag. And I hope at that stage, unless you came from a VP sales background to become the CEO, you should not be an amazing VP sales, neither an amazing VP finance, neither an amazing VP operations. So that's why, the CEOs are generalists, right? So they just know what looks good or what doesn't look. So they were really quick to understand if people are telling them crap or not, right? Because that's the way they're able to defend themselves, right?
Well, again, that's a key part of the system is if you ask people to predict their performance, if they tell you all quarter they're going to get there, I'm going to achieve this goal, I'm going to achieve this goal, I'm going to achieve this goal, and then they don't achieve the goal, you have just identified a poor performer with their own data. I don't have to know anything about sales to know that if the salesperson tells me every week they're going to hit their number and they don't hit their number, they didn't do their job.
Right.
An 8-year-old can manage from that perspective. Okay. You told me all quarter you were going to get it done. You didn't get it done. That's you saying you didn't do your job. And so that's a key part of the system. And when you're managing these executives, I'm managing a public company. I got a CFO who's got 30 years public company experience. What the hell do I know about being I can't get into the technical details, but I can set clear goals and objectives that help meet the goals and objectives of the organization. And then I can hold him accountable to telling me whether he's going to get to achieve those goals or not. And if he doesn't, if he tells me he is and he doesn't, that is a clear sign he is not performing. And that's really all there is to it. Don't make it super complicated.
And that's the difficult part. So if we go back to the startup stage of the organization, so you love it to have that CFO, that VP sales, that VP CS, and you didn't have almost any of the seats in the table. So if you didn't do it yourself, nothing would happen. So you will just go bankrupt and get out of business, right?
Yeah. And so you develop those habits of doing that job at the startup stage, and I've been there and done it. But once you get to scale, you have to stop doing everybody else's executive role and let it go. And a lot of CEOs, that's where founders fail. If they make it past that stage, like, you got a founder that's running a 250 person company, there's no reason to me they can't take it to be a 10,000 person company. Right. But if they haven't made that transition from 25 to 150, that's where typically they get replaced by the board.
And please don't come with excuse that we don't have enough profitability or cash flow to hire those people, because then we might not have a real business and we might have an issue with the strategy and with the model. Maybe we should not competing at all in that area, right? So
I mean, at those numbers, once you get to 150, do you really need the 40-second software developer? Are they really contributing? Or how about we only have 40 software developers and we hire a head of HR, because employee engagement and management is going to be a really big deal for us being successful in this organization.
Yeah. So we've been talking about kind of the typical issues that we see in CEOs, but the difficult part, and I like our conversation because I think that we got to some specific details and specific kind of thought process, bad habits that we need to get out and be able to move to the next stage. And maybe I would like to kind of close the show before going to the last segment of the show, where we have a quick question and answer rhythm, by asking you, is there anything that typically people don't agree with you, or it's not kind of the common language when we are talking about training CEOs, that you'd like to highlight, where you have a contrarian view about the CEO role?
Yeah, I think it's a lot around how CEOs are selected and what people think is good experience for a CEO. And, most of the time when I see CEOs being hired, there are a couple of different models. A lot of times they hire somebody who's had a large sales position, and think that having run a $100 million sales organization makes them well qualified to be CEO of a $10 million company. And to me, again, that's because they have a poor mental model. If they understood that customers and employees and shareholders are a big part of the CEO job, and the typical salesperson has no experience setting HR policy, dealing with shareholders and investors, even really dealing with customer service, that those areas are just as likely to be a problem as sales, and that you're not hiring somebody to come in and sell more for the organization as CEO. And then the other model you see is hiring a CFO type to watch the money, and that's their background, and think that makes them, because they've watched the money at $1 billion company, they're perfect to be CEO of a $100 million company. And that's just different. They're just different roles. And so, the experience and how you hire a CEO, I want people who are generalists, as you mentioned. The more broad their experience, the more likely they're going to be able to transition into the CEO role well, and more likely they're going to be successful. If you just hire the best salesperson, then don't be shocked when the company kind of goes to heck in a handbasket from an execution perspective, because they're just running around trying to make deals.
Absolutely. That is the typical red flag that we see in a lot of startups when they've typically the technical background. That's another kind of issue, is lack of revenue instincts and lack of how to build the revenue machine. On the other side is, people that are a little bit bipolar. One day they wake up with one idea about how they will get the next deal. The other day they will wake up with another idea, and then the organization is completely without focus, and everyone is frustrated. And then it gets to a moment that you can't save the quarter anymore at the last minute, no matter how much you work, right? So just typically why we see that then it comes the growth plateau, and you can't break the growth plateau there. So let's go to the last segment of the show, Joel. If you'd have the opportunity to have a quick coffee with yourself at the beginning of your career in the 90s, what advice would you offer to your younger Joel?
Well, I had an engineering degree, and so I thought it was all about being smart and technical and knowing things. And I would tell the younger Joel that you need to start learning about people and all the unique human behaviors and foibles. And because to achieve anything great, you're going to have to get a large group of people to work together. And that's really challenging if you think everybody is just like you, because they're not.
What are you the most proud of on your journey so far?
Well, from a kind of pure business perspective, the 31 quarters of double-digit growth, I think because you don't get there by accident. That requires a lot of work. You can have a good run, but you don't keep doing it quarter after quarter after quarter without shooting yourself in the foot, unless you kind of have a good management leadership system in place.
Right. Worst advice ever received?
Yeah. So I've had people, I remember one particular instance, I took over as CEO, and people say, well, you shouldn't do anything. You should, just observe for the first 90 days or 180 days and kind of figure out what's going on. And I think that's terrible advice for a CEO. I mean, a CEO is like captain of the ship. And, if you step on deck as captain, and you say, well, I'm just going to watch, the crew's like, well, wait a minute, we don't even know where we're going yet. And so you when you step into the CEO role, you kind of have to take charge. Doesn't mean you want to blow everything up right away, but you're responsible day one. And so you better figure out where we're going quick and what to do. And you can't just sit back like you can in some roles where you take over a role and the organization's running well and you just kind of sit and I say, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to observe. That works in some of the executive roles. I don't think that works in the CEO role.
Favorite book?
Probably First Break All the Rules. Marcus Buckingham came out 25 years ago or something now, a long time ago. But it was the first book that for me satisfied the engineer in me about the people side of the equation, that gave real data and information about how to think about people. And so that was very influential in my career.
Favorite movie or series, whatever you prefer.
Well, yeah, my favorite business movie, partly because it's hard to find and not everybody's seen it, but is Barbarians at the Gate, which is the story of the leveraged buyout of RJR Nabisco. There was a book, of course, Barbarians at the Gate. A lot of MBAs have read the book, and the book's fabulous. But the movie was also pretty good too. And it's if you haven't seen that,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's only available on DVD, and so you can't stream it. And so a lot of people have never seen it.
I like that one. And finally, your favorite podcast?
All In.
All In.
The All In The All In podcast is one that I have enjoyed, especially lately. They've been doing a lot of great things, some of the presidential candidates and stuff. And I have an interest in to me, the American president role is the ultimate CEO role, hardest, most complicated CEO role in the world. And so I follow that kind of as a hobby.
Absolutely. Joel, congrats for the amazing career and for the amazing book and everything that you are doing to support CEOs. We have that passion in common and helping them scale. And thanks so much for making the time and sharing your experience with us.
Great to be here, and happy to have people reach out. Love talking about how to be a better CEO.
Thank you. And to our community, thanks for being there. As you see, we keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life a little bit easier as you scale up your company. See you soon and keep scaling.